Yo, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about the additional modulation sources you have available to yourself. This will affect the way more options to control how parameters behave. I've decided to cover these all in one big swoop because they only really need one big swoop. So we have this key M, and we're going to control the volume for everything. So it's going to be volume. So with this key M, what does this stand for? This stands for keyboard mapping. So on your keyboard, you have these low notes. You have some high notes. And what's cool about this is you can make the high notes respond differently. So let's say our high notes get a little bright and we want to just turn them down a little bit. Well, we can do something like this. So what we just did is we said low notes, and you can see actually if you hover your keyboard, your mouse over this up here in the hint window, it'll tell you what note you're on. So you see all our notes are represented, and we're saying these higher notes should be softer. So here's our low notes, and this middle line represents the note we last played or the note we are currently playing. But if I go up to my high notes, when in reality they should be this loud. Now we have the Fletcher Munson too, so let's do something dramatic. So okay, we want there to be this like gate right here. So if we play a really low note, we'll hear it. But if we play another note, no sound. So this is really nifty. We can make changes to our spectrum according to where our key lies. So we can make higher notes, not stand out so much. Very useful for modulation and pitch and a few other things. Maybe you want the pitch to be more dramatic in the upper end and not so dramatic in the low end, or vice versa. That way you can preserve your tuning and your fundamental while still having really interesting content up high. So there's some potential here. Next up, we have velocity. This is velocity mapping. Every time I see M, I want to think modulating, but it's not. It's just velocity mapping. So I happen to have that on my keyboard. So let me quick turn it on. Velocity on. Okay, cool. So now when I hit my key soft, you can see my keyboard now supports velocity mapping. So what this does is it changes how sensitive a parameter is to velocity mapping. So if I want something like this, now maybe this is more easily demonstrated just by clicking on the screen. So let me turn this back off because I hate the way my keyboard does it sometimes. So when we play it, it shows us where it is on the screen. We can change the velocity mapping. Maybe we want softer when we hit our key softer, which is the equivalent. Wait, if you don't know what I'm doing, when I click higher up on the note on the key on the keyboard, it gets softer. When I click farther up, it gets louder. So when I click back here, I'm hitting a value down here. Now what I've just said is all these values, so all the way up to like here on my keyboard, like as far as how fast I'm hitting the key, they're all soft. And then only the very loudest values will be heard as they should be. So you see, but if I come up here, it gets substantially louder. So that's what velocity mapping does. Very useful feature. And this just says all of them are the same no matter what the key hit is. And then usually the plugin itself responds to velocity changes in the keyboard anyway. So it's really for specific parameter controls. Now, if we come over here to Mod X, when I first was learning about Citrus or opened it up, everyone opens it up because they want to see the cool gadgets they just bought or stole. Don't steal though. That's bad. So we have our matrix here, and I looked at this and I was like, what the junk is this? And then I knew that modulation was a thing. I knew it was something. So I assumed that this was somehow modulation. It's not. I'm just telling you a little reminiscent story of the nightmare I had when I was trying to learn this a long time ago. So modulation X links a parameter. Mod X links a parameter to, it's technically a modulation, to this guy up here on the master. So if we go over to our main window, it's right here. We move it around. We can click and drag. So I just linked my volume to X. So when X is at 0, which is all the way over here, I get nothing. But as I turn it up, I get my sound. How nifty is that? That's pretty cool. So, okay, that's really great and dandy. And I can change the curve here, maybe make X, it has to have a high value on X before anything is heard versus a low value. It's important that you get an intuitive grasp on this so you can create interesting patches. And you may need to sit there and think about what you're doing for a while. But after you get used to it, it's really intuitive. You're just like, oh, I want this kind of a curve because I know it's going to output this data that way. We're setting up linear systems. So if we come over to Mod Y, I'm going to disable Mod X. I can do the same thing for the Y. And so I could say, oh, I'm going to turn it down. So let's say I don't want it to really be heard until mod y gets really high values. So over here, my y value, this is 0 because it goes up and down. So nothing, 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 nothing. And you see it's a very different kind of fade. And you see we add some high frequency components that went a little bit outside of the actual note. Now, we're going to talk about this thing later in the master section. I guess we can talk about one other thing about it. Smooth will interpolate the values. So when I move up and down like this, there's sudden values happening. They're going like on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, off. But if I turn smoothing on, it will smooth it out just a little bit. It'll put a curve on the end, a really tiny curve. However, smoothing is off, it'll go on, off, on, off. It'll do exactly what we want. So this could make a huge difference in the way you're modulating something, the way this works. So it can smooth out clickiness and things that you don't like, or it can add that sharpness that you're looking for. So those are those. Now we have a little bit of a special one here. This is your random. And I don't know what the deal is because FM8 has this too. They just wanted it to sound like analog synths, I guess, but you can add randomness to your signal on a particular parameter. So for example, if I put a value down, and right now it will randomize my value. So I'm hitting a key. My keyboard has been set. I set it up, as you saw earlier, so that when I hit my key, it always plays the same volume. So you can hear my volume changing, so you know that it's been randomized. Now I make a curve. It'll be a little bit more random. But when it happens, it'll drop out quite a bit. So what you can do, so basically saying I'll get these values more often and these values less often. So the more curve, the more random. So you might try just drawing random crap. So you might say I want a value around here more often and then occasionally a value that's higher. So we got a pretty level thing. It's not super random, but here we can make it random all right. So you see we get some randomness. More curves, more random. I think what I said before, if it's a flat line like this, it's not going to be that random. This is the part that will introduce the randomness right here. So one other thing to note is you get one random value per voice. So if you've got your unison going and you've got 4, 5, 8 voices or whatever, then, and this brings up your CPU quite a bit, which is why you might want to use chorusing, but it says per voice, so I'm pretty sure it's referencing the unison. This will generate a random value for each of those. So it's really great. I think it said it's a floating point random value. So if you know binary and stuff, it's not super important, but it's always curious. It's always interesting to see what the developer thinks is worth putting in the manual. Okay, so we're going to talk about this later, so don't freak out about it. Now we have this last one, unison. This is directly correlated to that thing I just said we're going to talk about later. But if I turn it up, we've already talked about this. I turned it up to 9. I have 9 voices, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And they get randomized. I get additional little variations that allow my sound to sound thicker. Now, that's on a sine wave. It sounds very different on like this is a triangle saw wave thing. Very, very different. So this is essentially configuring how they're introduced and how the randomness is. But we can get really specific for each voice. So we have voice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Technically, there's 8, but there's 9 is the first one, our first sound. That's why you can only go down to 1 on unison. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I just had to count. I just had to make double check. So we could say on voice 2, because voice 1 is not represented. I guess we could call this voice 1. It's all relative. So we could say I want it only this loud. That's as loud as I want it to get. I don't want it any louder than that. And then we could say on voice 3, I want it that loud. Voice 4, I don't want to hear these. I'm wasting CPU. I don't want to use any CPU. I mean, I want to use a bunch of CPU and not hear any benefits from it. I'm not sure if this actually I wonder if that does save you on CPU. I don't know. It's probably the way they configured the setup. But let's say I want my values only to be that loud. Like that's as loud as I want my unison to be. This will make my original tone much louder. So I can put the unison and in this way I can fade it back. You can hear my original tone, but you can hear the other stuff. Now if I bring this stuff up, let's say I want these last 3 voices louder, you can hear the variation. Versus if I brought them all down, except for like these, And you can hear them being panned out. Again, that's controlled over here. One of these is panning. Let me look at it's this one. So almost always the first one. See, mono. So we'll talk about that later. But anyways, this controls those settings. So it's really, really nifty. And you have that for 6 operators. This is ridiculous. And you can randomize the value for each one of those unison voices. Like, oh my gosh. And then when you can set stuff to your mod Y and move it, and you can link up stuff, and you have LFO envelopes, and your brain just explodes from the amount of control that you now have available. It's like, holy freaking crap. Like, this is insane. So that's that. That is what these things do. That is what they are for. We are going to be looking at probably these next. I don't know. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day. Woo!